In medicine, confusion costs marks and mistakes cost lives. Stop memorizing, start understanding. This is Dr. ABM, where medicine finally makes sense. What's up, future doctors, nurses, physiologists, and medical students and dental students out there? In this video, we're going to break down homeostasis physiology in the simplest way possible. And trust me, by the end of this video, you should understand everything on homeostasis, negative feedback, positive feedback, and feed-forward mechanism. Let's get right in. Now, here's the thing. Your body is fighting for balance every time. Your glucose is either going too high. When your glucose goes too high, your body reacts. When it goes too low, your body reacts. When your body temperature drops, your body reacts. When it rises, your body reacts. If your blood pressure changes, your body reacts. So, if these balancing systems fail, disease will begin. So today we're going to talk about what homeostasis entails, negative feedback mechanism, positive feedback mechanism, blood glucose regulation, thermoregulation, and I'll show you how all these systems follow one exact physiological pattern that makes exam much easier. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment down below, because it really helps the channel continue producing free physiology videos for you guys. Let's dive right in. So first of all, what exactly is homeostasis? Homeostasis is basically the ability of the body to maintain a stable internal environment despite changes occurring inside or outside the body. That's a very, very important definition. The ability of the body to maintain a stable internal environment despite changes occurring inside or outside the body. Now, another simple way to think of homeostasis is this. Homeostasis equals balance. Your body always wants balance. Your body does not want to be too hot, not too cold either. Not too much glucose, not too little glucose. Not too much water loss, not too much acidity. So every time and everything must remain within a normal physiological range. Now, the beautiful thing about physiology is that the body already has built-in systems that continuously monitor these changes. And most of these systems operate through something called the feedback mechanism. The two major ones are positive feedback and negative feedback, of which the negative feedback is by far the most common thing. Now, quickly we'll talk about the components of the homeostatic system. Now, talking about the components of the homeostatic system, before we jump into examples, I want you to understand the major components of every homeostatic system. So almost every feedback mechanism has, number one, stimulus, two, receptor. So stimulus, then the receptor, then a control center, then effector, and a response is made. So let's quickly explain them. The stimulus is the change that occurs in the body. Any change, whether the body gets too hot or too cold, that's a change. The receptor detects the change, right? It detects it. The control center will process the information and decide what to do. Usually the control center is the brain. And then the effector will carry out the response that was decided by the control center. And the response is usually, and we attempt to restore normal balance. So if you understand these 5 things, physiology becomes easier for you. Again, don't forget the components: stimulus, receptor, control center, effectors, and then a response is made. Alright, so quickly we'll talk about negative feedback, which is the most important feedback mechanism. Now, negative feedback is that mechanism that counteracts a change. It's very important. It opposes the original stimulus. So if something goes too high, of course, negative feedback will try to bring it down. If something goes too low, negative feedback will try to bring it back up. The whole goal is restoration of normal balance. Now, the best way to understand this is through examples. And the first example we're going to use is blood glucose regulation. Now, let's assume that you just finished eating rice, pizza, bread, soft drinks, shawarma, basically a healthy carbohydrate meal. Your blood glucose level begins to rise. That rise in glucose is the stimulus. Now, receptors in the pancreas. So you have a stimulus, where blood glucose level rise, that is the stimulus. Then the receptors in the pancreas, the beta cells in the pancreas, will detect this increase, and then they will respond to the elevated glucose level by releasing insulin. So the pancreas now becomes the control center. So insulin is released. Now, what does insulin do? Insulin travels through the bloodstream and binds to receptors on the surface of the body cells, especially muscle cells, liver cells, fat cells. Now, when insulin binds to this receptor, blood glucose transport channels opens and glucose enters into the cell. So the liver takes up glucose and stores it, right? What happens is that blood glucose level begins to decrease. So glucose is moving from the blood now into the cell, because the body cells will begin to take up the glucose. And then as the blood glucose level declines, homeostasis. Remember, we started from high glucose. Now we are back to low glucose, and homeostasis has been restored. Take note. Now let's talk about low blood glucose. Remember, high blood glucose is regulated by release of insulin. Low blood glucose is regulated by release of glucagon. So if we have the opposite situation, maybe somebody has not eaten for days or hours, the stimulus here is that the blood glucose level falls, right? So blood glucose begins to fall. Again, low glucose becomes the stimulus, right? So the pancreas again detects this decrease. By this time, the alpha cells are stimulated, and the alpha cells will release glucagon. Then glucagon again travels to the liver, right? And glucagon tells the liver, release more glucose. Now the liver has stored, remember, the liver has stored the glucose here as glycogen. So here is where it is needed. So the liver now has stored glycogen. Glycogen is basically stored glucose. So the liver breaks down the glycogen through glycogenolysis. Check out our biochemistry pathway on glycogenolytic pathway and gluconeogenetic pathway. So the liver now also produces new glucose through gluconeogenesis, and then the new glucose enters into the bloodstream and blood glucose rises back to normal. Again, negative feedback, because low glucose has now been increased. So let's summarize this quickly. High glucose, right? In this case, you have high glucose. What happens? Insulin is released, glucose decreases, right? And then low glucose, glucagon is released, glucose increases, back to normal and equilibrium. This is homeostasis. Remember, negative feedback always counteracts the original change. Next up, we'll talk about thermoregulation. Thermoregulation. Your body temperature must remain within a normal range. So if the body temperature becomes too high or too low, enzymes stop functioning properly. And severe temperature imbalance can be very life-threatening. So the hypothalamus is the major control center for temperature regulation. You can think of the hypothalamus as the body's thermostat. So let's discuss response to cold temperature first. So imagine that somebody enters a very cold environment, right? The cold temperature becomes the stimulus, is it not? What happens is that thermoreceptors in the skin detect the cold, and signals are sent to the hypothalamus via the thermoreceptors through the sensory nerves. The hypothalamus, which is the control center, will respond in several ways. The first thing we can do is cause vasoconstriction. The blood vessels will narrow. Why? Because less blood will reach the skin surface. So you're going to have the skin blood vessels constrict, and less heat is lost because less blood reaches there. Second thing that might happen is that sweat production will reduce. Is it not? Because we know that sweating cools the body, and the body is already cold. Then another thing you might have is the hypothalamus will initiate or stimulate shivering. So the skeletal muscles contract. There's rapid skeletal muscle contraction, and don't forget that contraction leads to generation of heat. Now all these responses help to return the body temperature back to normal. Again, negative feedback. The response to hot temperature again is negative feedback, right? This is the opposite situation of cold. If a person is exposed to extreme heat, the hot temperature becomes the stimulus. The thermoreceptors will pick it up and send it to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus again will activate the cooling mechanism. First, the skin blood vessels will dilate, so more blood is going to reach the skin surface and more heat escapes. Right? Second thing you might want to have is sweat production. As sweat evaporates from the skin, the body cools down. Then you can have shivering. So shivering is inhibited because the body no longer wants additional heat production, right? And there will be relaxation of the hair follicles. All these mechanisms, their aim is to lower body temperature back to normal. Again, this is negative feedback. Now, let's talk about positive feedback. Positive feedback is different from negative feedback. Instead of counteracting the original stimulus, positive feedback amplifies it. It strengthens the response. Now, positive feedback is less common in physiology, and that's because continuous amplification can become dangerous, right? So you have more negative feedbacks than positive feedbacks. But there are only few extremely important examples, and one of them is parturition, childbirth. So during labor, right, the baby's head stretches the cervix. Now that stretching becomes the stimulus. The stretch receptor will send signal to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus will stimulate the posterior pituitary gland, right? And oxytocin is released from the posterior pituitary gland. Oxytocin travels to the uterus and stimulates uterine contraction. So hypothalamus, right, nerve impulse from the cervix goes to the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus initiates the posterior pituitary gland to release oxytocin. Then the oxytocin is released, and then impulse is sent, right, to the uterus and stimulates uterine contraction. Those contractions are responsible for pushing the baby further downwards, which stretches the cervix even more. And more stretching means more oxytocin is produced. More oxytocin means stronger contraction. Stronger contraction causes even more stretching. So the response keeps amplifying and amplifying until delivery occurs. This is positive feedback and is very important. So we see the same sequence again. The baby moves towards the cervix here, right? Then stretch receptor stimulated, hypothalamus, smooth muscle, cervical contraction. So it happens, you see it all over here again, right? So take note of all these important parts. So another example of positive feedback we have is lactation, right? When a baby sucks the breast, mechanoreceptors are stimulated and signals will travel to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus will stimulate the anterior pituitary gland to release prolactin, and prolactin will stimulate milk production. The hypothalamus will also stimulate posterior pituitary gland to release oxytocin. Oxytocin will stimulate milk ejection. This is called the let-down reflex. Now, as milk enters the baby's mouth, the baby continues sucking, and continuous suckling stimulates more prolactin and oxytocin release, which will further stimulate more milk production. So this is the concept of positive feedback. Another example is platelet plug formation. Platelet, the thrombocytes, right? Suppose a blood vessel gets injured, right? The platelet become activated. Activated platelets release chemicals. These chemicals will attract even more platelets, and more platelets will release more chemicals, which will allow more platelets to arrive, right? So you have platelets as you have activation due to injury, activated platelet, damaged blood vessel, right? So this attracts more platelets, and platelet aggregation keeps increasing until a platelet plug forms and bleeding stops. So this also is positive feedback. Take note. Now there's a concept of feed-forward mechanism. Feed-forward mechanism means the body is anticipating the action that has not occurred yet, but the body is anticipating it, right? An example is salivation to the smell of food. So you assume you are hungry, and then you see a very well prepared food, and then you start salivating. You have not taken the food, but your body is already making necessary adjustments. That's feed forward. Another example is contraction of the muscles ahead. Now, this is the difference or the differences between positive feedback and negative feedback. Negative feedback counteracts the original stimulus. Example is blood glucose regulation, thermoregulation, blood pressure control. Positive feedback, on the other hand, amplifies the original stimulus. Example is childbirth, lactation, platelet plug formation. And remember, homeostasis is all about maintaining internal balance. That is one of the central themes of physiology. So you can pause this video and go through these differences. Alright guys, that wraps up our discussion on homeostasis physiology. If you truly understood negative feedback, positive feedback, feed forward, thermoregulation, glucose regulation, oxytocin physiology, platelet plug formation, then honestly you're already ahead in physiology. Now that's how this concept should be understood, clear, precise, and exam ready. If this helped you, go ahead, like the video, drop a comment below, and tell me what topic you want next. This is Dr. EBM, where you don't just study medicine, you master it. See you in the next video.